Good. Welcome everybody. Welcome to the LSA and the LSA's Thursday Talks series. Very good to see people starting to enter the room. As always, my name is Samantha Hardingham. I am the Academic Director at the LSA. Very delighted to host this series. Whilst I let everybody come into the room, I think I'll give everyone a few minutes because it usually takes that long to down tools and get lunch and then get back in front of the screen again. So I will do that before I introduce our guest for this week. I should say that, I usually top and tail these sessions with what happened last week and what's coming up next. So I will do that. Last week, and just to sort of really emphasize the range and extraordinary range and diversity of material that we cover in the Thursday talks. Last week we heard from Morgan Parrick of Hunters, who gave us a journey through healthcare, incredible detailed design process around designing very specific conditions for treatment rooms and with using the most extraordinary machinery and working with machines and people, and the kind of whole choreography around designing those spaces. Fascinating stuff. Next week we hear from Karikeg Rajput from PRP on tackling overheating in our homes. So quite a different subject matter. And now, today, and without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Bola Abisogun OBE, I'm proud to say, on his behalf, of BIM Academy, to deliver a talk called Diversity and Leadership. I wonder if the title really talks about what you're really going to get into, because I think it's incredibly rich. So perhaps your title is broad, and we'll see. I'm sure we will see. But I just to very quickly introduce you, Bola. Thank you very much for coming to join us. You will reflect on recent developments in the construction industry, such as the Building Safety Act and the emergence of AI, but it will continue the conversation on cultural transformation and digital skills. The session will explore your particular concern that the industry has not adequately embraced change and questions what it will take to do so, emphasizing the importance of prioritizing well-being and fostering diverse talent to achieve sustainable change. So incredibly current, relevant subject on the tips of everybody's tongues right now. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Bola, and we'll pick up questions as they come in about 40 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes from now.
Thank you so much, Samantha. That's amazing. Well, welcome all for those that are here, and looking forward to a conversation regarding my particular sweet spot around the conversation of EDI and the relationship with data and technology. So I won't go into too much detail regarding my background, because I think Samantha's done a great job in consolidating my near 30-year career. But for all intents and purposes, I am Dr. Bola Abisogun OBE. I'm a digital director at BIM Academy, wear several hats across the sector. I'm also the chair of the Construction Industry Council EDI committee, which has a focus on professional bodies. And big thanks and plug to Graham Watts and others in that space who are doing some amazing work. So for today, we are, and I'm very humbled to be here representing BIM Academy on a conversation about diversity and leadership. Big thanks to the LSA, yourself, Samantha, Zafir. Big thank you to Dr. Izzy Williams at RIDA, the entire inclusivity team and BIM Academy, and all of my wonderful colleagues across the country. It is a wide topic of discussion, and there's no doubt that my title is provocative, perhaps intentionally so, but I'm asking the question about the relationship between leadership data and technology, and I'm framing that question in the context of diversity, and we really talk about diversity of thought amongst other things. So this is a bit of a background, and I would say for those observing this conversation now and in the future, these slides will be made available because it's a lot to take in for 35 minutes. Leading from the front, something I've always questioned the industry doesn't do well. The industry doesn't lead from the front well. So I was appointed alongside my deputy, Rebecca Lovelace from Building People, November 22. And I've asked and presented a challenge to the sector around what inclusive leadership means and looks like, and how my journey began in this space, in this particular conversation back in August 2000 on my return trip from Atlanta in the USA. And I'm asking the question, what will it take for the industry to fully embrace this nuanced, emotive, multifaceted conversation that really should be only seeking to create more talent and allow people to thrive in their whole selves in the workplace? And to that end, there was an amazing event that took place late last month. And I've referred to that milestone as an opportunity to demonstrate collaborative leadership across the professions. It was an amazing session of conversations, provocative, emotional, factual. And for me, it was an opportunity to really lean in to the big question, which is how do we come together to stop competing, support one another, standardize a language, produce similar ways of talking about the same things, and make that conversation inclusive both at senior level and right the way through the vertical value chain called the built environment sector. Again, so this is just an example of some of the photos that were taken and some of the statements made. Amanda Clack, past president RICS, a great ally of mine, chaired the panel that I was part of. And again, there was a real move towards recognizing that we have talked about this subject matter for so long. We need to think about talking about it in different ways, but we need to act. We need to act. We need to, as it says there, we need to inspire engagement. We need to collaborate. We need to do all these things that I've been talking about personally for nearly 30 years. But it was good to see such a high level, senior representative audience who are willing to really dig a little deeper on what diversity across the sector means, but specifically what that should mean for leaders who are still struggling with the entire conversation. Part of my why is the work I've done through Diversity Surveyors. Diversity Surveyors is a network that I created in 2005. My driver was because back then I didn't see many people that looked like me in senior positions. You could argue not much has changed nearly 20 years later, but the mentoring scheme that we've established with UCEM is all about nurturing talent and creating opportunities for students, whether they're postgrad or undergrad, to engage with senior professionals in the sector and figure out how, from an ethnic minority perspective, because it is slightly nuanced and different in terms of that career journey, we have established a mentoring scheme that just adds value to what UCM do as a great organization. We've had an array of successes, but we haven't yet even scratched the surface of what that particular initiative is trying to do. Now, even at this point, and this slide is meant to tease the audience, I want to take you back to where my journey began in this whole conversation and the way it began. And there are some facts that even today, uh, nearly 25 years later, the facts are still being discussed as whether or not they truly happen. So back in 99, I was preparing to resit because I failed on my first attempt, the APC, that's the Assessment for Professional Competence, uh, provided by the RICS. I was in the office, pretty much, regular day. And a senior surveyor at the company that I was at the time walked in and threw this magazine at me and said that I should consider myself fortunate, of which a whole range of emotions overwhelmed me at that point in time. But I did take the magazine, I did read it, and I have kept it, and still have it in my possession till today. But the cover, the message on the cover, produced by a leading authority in construction, Building Magazine, for those that know it, it's quite self-explanatory. And even back then, May 99, the industry was being asked the question, is the industry confronting racism? And it was set in the context of the equality, diversity, and inclusion piece. So that was my introduction to some of the really prevalent issues in the sector at that time, 1999, okay? 10 years later, I was then approached by the Equality and Human Rights Commission and asked to chair an initiative, as it is on your screen, a focus on an inquiry into race discrimination. And there were two reasons why I was asked to do this. I had done a lot of work to campaign about representation of minority groups in construction. And secondly, there was the bigger challenge as to why is it that minority groups are not as inspired to join the sector and why they are not thriving or appear to be thriving in the professions. Great piece of work. We produced an action plan and not much has changed in many ways. 6 years after that, having taken diversity surveys to the RICS in 2005, which was 10 years before this particular piece of work was completed, we had to figure out a way to really bring the business case for diversity to life, a one that would challenge, equip, empower, and inspire business leaders and business owners. So we did lots of work, and in 2015, we produced this infographic, which basically said, in many ways, there's a competitive value for having a diverse leadership within your business. And these are some of the low-hanging fruit. Having greater market attractiveness and customer potential. You're a better financially performing organization. That's a fact. Clearly, you will resonate and attract more talent, different kinds of talent. But more importantly, for me, it was about how powerful your innovation becomes, how better you become as a business at solving problems, whether those problems are to do with your profession or your professional services, whether they're to do with creating value in society, whether they're to do with empowering your people, creating better workplaces and spaces, allowing that mental health and well-being piece to flourish, or whether it's simply creating the connection between education and industry. Diversity as a business case has a value. And I've used that business case to challenge and disrupt in the professions ever since. A year later, I was invited to a roundtable hosted by UK Construction Week. And again, the senior leader representation, you had some heavy hitters in the room, all of who were saying largely the same thing, but we concluded back in May 2016 that the industry needs a change of mindset. I thought it was a eureka moment. It was a conversation I found very impactful, informative. I was inspired when I left. I was of the opinion that all of those present on the day would take the initiative back to their respective organizations and do something amazing. Some did, some didn't for whatever reason. But as it says there on the screen, the skill shortage was referenced as an issue then, it's still an issue now. Diversity was mentioned then, it's still an issue now. The housing crisis was mentioned then, it's still an issue now. And the reputation of the sector was mentioned then, it's still an issue now. So there's a consistent pattern in the issues that were then and now, and how the industry is dealing with them. And in my way, in my world, the industry isn't really dealing with the issue. And that fact, that observation, don't take my word for it. Let's go back to Building Magazine, who in 1999 had made a suggestion about the industry's lack of ability to address ED&I in its widest context and definition. In 2019, 20 years later, 2 decades, they produced another article, fabulous article, and I just fell in love with the cover. The cover talks about the industry needed to take a good look at itself. Again, and quite rightly, it's portraying an industry that is made up of different types of people, different races, age, capability, gender, sexual orientation, etc. All of these strands of diversity that the industry is still struggling to deal with. But if you look at the narrative, the question, or the statement made by Building back in April 2019, it talked about construction's hidden problem. And in many ways, it is a hidden problem. And it's a hidden problem because so many other challenges coexist alongside the elephant in the room, which I call is the cultural challenge. But I want to bring it back now to a tangible reference point that we are all fluent with in the UK and pretty much across the world, and that was the tragedy around Grenfell Tower. And Grenfell Tower, for me personally, was the embodiment of everything wrong with our sector. Everything from how we design projects, how we procure projects, how we construct projects, how we allow those assets to then be occupied, and more importantly, how we maintain those assets during occupation. Grenfell Tower for me embodied all of that. And I actually turned my back on the sector. I crashed out and thought, what more can I do to help fix some of the challenges? And in my world, because of my journey into construction and my love affair with technology, and particularly digital twins, my logic was if the Grenfell Tower pre-construction process had been delivered in the context of a digital twin solution, administered in a common data environment, so all the information and data is agile, it's all digital, the design team is populated within a common environment in view of the client. If the pre-construction phase had been delivered that way, would this unfortunate incident have happened? And in my world, it wouldn't have happened, because part of that design process, a risk management process, would have flagged to some degree that the proposed cladding wasn't fit for purpose. And I'll just leave that statement there. But I'm asking the wider question, how do we avoid a repeat of Grenfell if we do not have diversity of thought, i.e. diversity of leadership, on every project that is being administered in the sector? There was a success, if you want to call it that, regarding the industry's approach and response to the Grenfell Tower tragedy, and it was the evolution of the Building Safety Act. And the Building Safety Act, since June 2017, we are now in the transitional phase, as this slide clearly shows, and big thanks to my dear colleague Alan Binns at Ryder, director of safety, health and safety, and all things CDM, etc. This is part of his body of work. And as you can see, we are in 2024. We are in the transitional phase of the Building Safety Act. But have we learned anything in the last 7 years is a question. And whilst the focus right now is on the ability to produce and maintain a golden thread on any given project for a client, I would ask the question, do we even have the skills, let alone the cultural competency to do that well? And given that the accountable person, the client for all intents and purposes, is exposed to all of that risk, I am now using the Building Safety Act and the legal requirement to create the golden thread. I'm conflating that legal obligation with the EDI conversation. And as God would have it, the common denominator in those two challenges is cultural. It's not procedural, it's not technological, it's not legislative, it's cultural. It's about people. And we do need leaders to step up and own this conversation and own that challenge. That's my challenge to the sector. That's the challenge I brought to BIM Academy, and we're dealing with it Ryder, and that's the challenge I'm pushing out to the entire sector globally. And I'm doing that because I have always challenged. I have always challenged consistently, because if we don't challenge and accept the status quo for what it is, innovation will never happen. I'm also a big fan of young people. This slide embodies some of those milestones in my 20-year journey in that social value creation piece. Being recognized was a complete honor and probably the most humbling thing I've achieved in my career. But working with young people, specifically young Black men, for a specific reason, but largely young people generally, I believe that is where not only the talent sits to shift the dial on the cultural challenge and blocker that I've experienced for 30 years, but I also believe that younger people are natively wired to coexist in a digital environment, and an environment that will command the use of digital twins. So with the blessing of my peers, and big thanks to a number of people at BIM Academy, specifically Dr. Graham Kelly, who's a major sponsor and ally on this initiative, I've decided to set up a CIC, a not-for-profit entity that is my way of trying to contribute to the ask I've been making for the last 30 years. You know, I'm almost fed up of asking the sector to do something that will equate to better representation, more inclusion, demonstrable leadership in an area or on an issue that the industry is struggling with. And I am now taking the challenge of what that diversity conversation means and has done, and I'm conflating that with the silver bullet for compliance with the Building Safety Act, which in my world is the digital twin. And I've gone ahead and set up the DTSA, where I remain the Chief Excitement Officer. The secret's in the name. I've got to excite the sector in order to inspire them to change. But I'm not doing this alone. The title of this wonderful opportunity to share my thoughts with you all was framed as diversity and leadership. And I have been fortunate as an industry veteran, for want of a better word, to have some great, deep and wide relationships, and have managed to assemble what I call a group of social value change agents, all of whom you see on this screen. And this is my attempt to demonstrate what diversity in leadership looks like, but not only from a visual perspective. I can tell you this, we had our first board meeting on Monday just gone, and the breadth and depth and diversity of ideas and passion, experience, value, appreciation, respect for others, desire to build, succeed, thrive, scale, empower, serve, electric. And I am already humbled by what we've achieved as a team as we embark upon our journey to create more social value through professional services, services that BIM Academy delivers so well and that Rider Architecture delivers so well. But we have to create value in order to have that very honest, challenging, provocative, nuanced, emotive conversation about diversity generally, but specifically in leadership. I'm dedicating this slide to BIM Academy. And obviously the two young men on this slide have shown me some real love and support. On the left-hand side, you have Andrew Johnson. He's head of learning and development at BIM Academy. Anything you want to know about BIM or learn about BIM, digital construction, etc., he's your go-to guy. We are working very closely to bring his body of work into the Digital Twin Skills Academy, aka the DTSA. But of course, I wouldn't have this opportunity to bring EDI into BIM Academy and therefore Rider, and therefore now into the DTSA without the support of Dr. Graham Kelly, who is the young man in the middle. And let's be clear, Rider haven't solved the issue or challenge about diversity at leadership level, but they're willing to embark on that journey. BIM Academy are embarking on the same journey, and it's a collective journey, and it's governed and supported by, we have an inclusivity team run by a lovely guy called Daniel Mossman. And the entire inclusivity team are, I suppose, empowered to educate the wider business about the need to have a respect for the diversity agenda, but also to contribute towards it. It's a big conversation. It's a conversation that is different for different people in different places and spaces, but I'm bringing that energy into the business. And at the DTSA, we are grateful that we now have a partnership with BIM Academy to bring that knowledge to help nurture and upskill young people, and to do so in this specific space of digital construction. This slide is just an attempt to show you the kinds of pro bono support and passion, collaboration, contribution that I've managed to amass over the last 5, even 10 years. Names you will recognize, and for those that you don't, go and check them out. Great organizations, but they understand what I'm trying to do to foster a senior level conversation that can filter down and begin to challenge everybody in the sector around not only creating better workplaces, but really from a building safety technology perspective, and in my case, using digital twins, getting the industry to understand that everybody has a role to play regarding the golden thread. So I'm conflating two separate, disparate, broken conversations into one. And I want to place young people at the core of that conversation so that they understand it and that they are empowered and skilled to lead from the front, as I am trying to do at the Construction Industry Council. You know, it's a conversation I can have for hours, but I really want to have a conversation with those that are present, those that may have posed some questions. I will open the floor up to yourself, Sophia and Samantha, for questions. But I'll stop there because I think we could have a very wide-ranging and long conversation. And I'd like to begin that conversation now, if I may.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bola. Absolutely, we'd be delighted to start that conversation here with the group present and those who have posted several questions online. So
Okay.
we should definitely move to that. Thank you so much for a really inspiring and just fantastic portrait of a lot of the work that you've been doing, and a lot of work that is so, you know, I don't want to say it's so behind the scenes in a way, but it is, because it's all the work that goes on. It's not in the headline, a lot of this work, but it absolutely influences headlines and headline news. And I just think that the way that you presented the cover of the magazine, and then, you know, what do you do about that? What do you do to affect that central message and make that central message move on is extraordinary, and just extraordinary complex as well. And I think you've just
Definitely.
touched on a few of those moments. So thank you so much for sort of starting to lay out that land in a way. It's also just staggering to see how long it takes to any change. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's a sort of perennial problem of civilization, isn't it? At what point do you really learn
Absolutely.
your mistakes
Absolutely.
or otherwise? Um, but it feels like that there is a sort of moment where there is not only more visibility, but there is more presence and discussion, and then let's turn that into action to
Mm.
move things on, given that it is a mammoth task. So I just, you know, thank you for keeping that conversation going and actively trying to move it on. I think is central to the point. Um, I'm going to get. I mean, I had a question. Oh, it's not really a question. Maybe it's just something to ask you to elaborate on a little bit more.
Okay.
Perhaps our audience. I know I have, you know, very limited patchy knowledge about what a digital twin is, and just to tell us a little bit more about how that works and what the role it's playing in what you're doing, because it
Sure, sure, sure. And thank you, Samantha, because I think you're right. This conversation for me, I've had to think about landing the conversation in a tangible way that the industry would take note of, right? And initially, because of my experience in North America and the Civil Rights Act and affirmative action, etc., I found it easier to navigate the conversation and transition that conversation into the UK. But regrettably, because the EDI conversation doesn't immediately speak commerce, it doesn't immediately speak finance, it doesn't immediately speak value,
Mm.
it's not one that really resonates at the highest level, right? So if you're passionate about this subject matter, you'll get involved.
Mm.
If you're not, you might just stay out. And there's nothing wrong with that. Um, so for me, my journey between 1999 and really 2017, when Grenfell happened, I had a eureka moment actually back in 2011 when the London riots happened. The work I was doing with the mayor's office led me to really think about how do I come up with a solution that will resonate with young people, but also bring younger people into the industry, and younger people that look like me, right? Black and brown, largely. How do I do that? Recognizing that the London riots became a national challenge for the government. But that was a tipping point for me to suggest, right, I've got to do something to help young people because I can.
Mm.
I'm born and raised in Hackney. I get it. I understand their plight. I know their journey. I know it isn't easy generally, but specifically from a minority group who are often underrepresented in construction at all levels. So when Grenfell Tower happened, I immediately recognized that if we had a digital pre-construction phase,
Mm.
we would have began the journey of a digital twin. And the digital twin, by definition, for those that don't know, in simple terms, is a virtual representation of an asset, a system, or a process. And if you think about the black box in an aeroplane, the black box in the aeroplane, in the unfortunate demise of a plane, is the first asset that the rescue team seek to find, to figure out what happened. And that black box can create a twin of the entire plane, its whole life in many ways. And my view was, if Grenfell Tower had had a digital twin of the building, of the asset, of the process of pre-construction, various elements of risk, one of which was the cladding, would have been flagged in an intelligent digital way, which may have given rise, had that diversity of thought been across the design team, if they'd had me on the team, possibly. But anyway, it would have flagged some risks, right? So I took that whole notion, that idea, I took it to a team that invited me to join the National Digital Twin Program, where the government was funding significant sums of money to help various sectors become more productive, more transparent, more agile, more innovative. And the Center for Digital Built Britain was created in 2017-18. I joined the team 2019, having spent some time with Mark Farmer's team over at CAST. And I brought this use case about Grenfell Tower and bringing digital twins into social housing for two reasons. Number one, to prevent fire spread and structural collapse, i.e. Building Safety Act, but also, and more importantly, to think about decarbonization of existing legacy buildings, right? If we're going to get to this 2050 ambition, we need to decarbonize the entire fabric of the built estate. Cambridge loved the idea, and they gave me an opportunity to bring that use case to life, which I did, and which became a real fan of Cabinet Office and the transforming industry and construction agenda. So the digital twin for me then became a vehicle to bring that issue and the elephant in the room around cultural change, because on the back of Grenfell Tower, Building Safety Act arrived. Clients were in a tiz around, well, how on earth do we do this? We can't delegate the responsibility, so we've got to own the responsibility. Do we have the skills to coexist and deliver the golden thread? Question mark. Does our design team have the skills to deliver the golden thread? Architect, engineer, landscaper, QS, etc. Question mark. Does the supply chain have the skills to coexist and deliver the golden thread? Question mark. And all through my 32 months sabbatical at Cambridge, it suddenly realized that no one was talking about skills. No one was talking about how do you now connect the idea behind the national digital twin and a virtual representation of every physical building across the country with the average person. And I took that another step further and said, well, how do you connect that big idea with young people, young designers, young engineers, young QSs? And that's how the idea behind the DTSA became a thing. So that was how I've been able to conflate the digital challenge around the Building Safety Act, the golden thread, with the cultural challenge of the EDI piece, which has been perpetual. So the challenge right now that I am pushing and owning is, what is it going to take for senior leaders to unlearn some of what they've learned, be prepared to learn new skills, and then how do those leaders then empower and inspire their own teams to learn those skills? And then once the teams have got the skills and start advising others and procuring projects, how do we then equip the supply chains, right? So the Building Safety Act is a generational piece of reform. That's a 30-year ambition. But in 2024, this is our make or break year. 2024 is the year where everybody has to shift. And I'm just not sure that the leadership is ready for the shift. Some of the young people maybe, but I'm not sure about the leaders.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to, thank you so much. It's really helpful to understand where it sits in your world. And it seems to me that as a sort of fundamental aspect of that, and that it's also a way of working. I mean, the digital twin represents a very particular way of working, which is
correct,
fundamentally about collaboration. And it seems to me that there's something that's slightly at odds still which is also the way that you describe it. You literally get, leadership here and then, teams. And we accept that there are given structures and hierarchies in needing to make projects move,
Agreed.
and to accommodate levels of experience. But at the same time, it seems to me that what the digital twin does is it gives you the opportunity to think about working in a different way, and that gap or recognition of what experience is. So a young person's adeptness with technology, and I say that with open mind and heart, because I have this conversation every day with, I being brought up with a certain way of thinking, in a systems thinking way, but certainly not in, adept with the softwares, but to sort of level out in a way that kind of learning and appreciate that there is cross learning to be done. So it seems to me that the opportunity for the digital twin is incredible from re-educating, which, again, it's about how to not repeat the same mistakes, i.e. we've just got to learn in a different way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the challenge. That's half the challenge, I think, just to accept that fact.
Yeah. Now look, I'm going to pick up some other questions, because otherwise I can tell we could talk about this for quite a while, carry this on. So I'm going to go to one of our audiences asked, do you know of any sectors that are particularly leading in terms of diversity and inclusion? What lessons could we take from adjacent jobs and industry?
Great question. Great question. Other sectors leading on EDI. If I was honest, I would point to legal.
Interesting.
They're doing some really good things in the legal space. Finance is really trying. But I think that's a really difficult question to answer with some hard, cold facts. But I think, there's pockets of greatness going on everywhere, right? But you've almost got to ask yourself, well, what is their driver? What is their motive? What are they really trying to fix? And they've all got different challenges that they're facing, right? In construction, we have the aging out process and we have the lack of representation for one. We've got this challenge for women, gender, it's a big issue. In the finance profession, there's a huge cohort of Black and brown talent. So their challenge is more about career progression in many ways. And that is why there are so many independents in the finance space, independent accountants, finances, etc. And it's ditto legal. Legal profession's notoriously been a white male-led profession. But they recognize that the support staff, the clerks and solicitors in those places have real talent. So now they're questioning themselves around, well, what more can we do to help career progression? But the common denominator, irrespective of sector, is that clients are now asking the question, how diverse is your team? Or how diverse will the team be that delivers my commission? So that's where all sectors become or face the same common denominator. So I would think finance and legal are doing much better than construction, but for different reasons in many ways.
No. As you say, built on very comparable but different cultural frameworks in a way. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Thank you. What does the role, sorry, let me start again. What does your role and work with Ryder include? Does that,
it's a great question. So fundamentally, I'm a digital director at BIM Academy. So my role is to really win work, right? Create relationships, sell the brand, push the brand, promote the brand. BIM Academy have recently been acquired by Ryder, so now it's a wholly owned subsidiary. Going through an interesting phase of change. Some amazing announcements are due quite soon. But I'm also here to challenge Ryder, right? And as one of very few people from a minority group at senior level within the business, I take ownership of that responsibility, and that's why I do as much as I can with the inclusivity team. But essentially, I'm a chartered quantity surveyor. How many quantity surveyors do you know working within the context and confines of an architectural practice? It just doesn't happen, right? Largely. I am the first and the only, but my reason was because I came through the BIM Academy machine, and BIM Academy is all about digital construction. So winning work, pushing the brand, empowering, sharing my story, public speaking, and now having fun with the DTSA is largely my role, right? But I love what I do. This is where I can define myself as, for example, the Chief Excitement Officer. I do not work, I serve, and I love what I do. And I think my greatest blessing, in answer to this question about what is my role at Ryder, is I found out my purpose very early on in my career, my purpose and my passion alongside my technical skill set. And I think that is what has helped me to do what I do at Ryder via BIM Academy and now via the DTSA. So I'm passionate about what I do. I love what I do, and I want to disrupt the status quo to create better outcomes, if that makes sense.
Yes, it totally makes sense, and you articulate it beautifully. So I think you know exactly what your role is. Okay, we have two more questions, which is probably good for given the time we have left. So I'm going to ask, what key moments, activities do you think influenced diversity in the sector most, or have influenced diversity? It's assuming you think it has been influenced. So what
Key moments.
are there key moments you think that have influenced diversity in this in the sector?
That's a really intriguing question. And I think personally, I'm aware of many milestones that I've been privy to, but none more than the George Floyd tragedy. And I was asked to write a piece for the RICS, which I will happily share. I was asked to share my perspective as a champion for EDI. And I have to admit, the post-pandemic shift has helped the EDI conversation from a procedural perspective, from a technological perspective, because you're realizing now those that can use tech and those that can't use tech, that is in it, has divided talent in its own right, right? But for me, the George Floyd moment was a tipping point in many ways, but it's been unsustainable.
Yeah.
The excitement, the euphoria of things are going to change. It lasted for about 12 months. There was a lot of corporate whitewash. I'm not a man of tokenism. I want a bit more substantial, tangible, evidence-based outputs that are sustainable. A lot of rhetoric, a lot of promises. So I think that was the most significant event that has, and even till today remains, a legacy event for the right and wrong reasons. But I think it's had the most profound effect on the entire sector, even if it has engendered a tokenistic approach to EDI, which in some ways it has. But I think the George Floyd tragedy as a moment in time was a wake-up call for a lot of people, a lot of businesses, and it was a particularly poignant wake-up call for the EDI conversation in construction and the professional services sector. So yeah, for me, that would be George Floyd.
Interesting. Thank you. I think, yeah, it is also a sort of shocking part of our civilization that it takes
Definitely.
tragedies every time
Exactly.
to awareness. Stephen Lawrence is another good example, fine example of that.
Absolutely.
And I guess it points to something I just wanted to pick up on, because I sort of underlined it when you said it, going back to your sort of timeline of moments where this conversation has sort of been had and then nothing happened afterwards, or hadn't evolved fast enough. And you said that the inquiry in 2009 produced an action plan, but there wasn't much action. And I just wonder, and then you got to 2015 and you got to develop the infographic. And I just wondered whether, being a really extraordinary public speaker, that communication, or the form in which that work is done or brought to the attention of the communities that really need to think about these things, senior leadership, people appointing people, the medium with which you do that, and it reaching the right people. I wonder if you've seen that change at all in the period of time you've been working.
Well, Samantha, not only is that a great question, it's a great point, because if social media was what it is today back then, I think we'd be having a slightly different conversation today, 10, 15 years later. In the absence of the proliferation of social media in 2009, it was a very muted, subliminal effort that only those in the know knew it was going on. Only the stakeholders that were invested knew it was happening. You could pick up the action plan of 2009, 10, 11 today, as I will share with you, and the contents of every one of those recommendations is as relevant today as it was then. What does that say? We've done nothing? No. Does that say we need to try harder? Absolutely. But what it really says is, what is the connection to the person? How many people are aware and vested in this action plan? And what do tangible actions look like that can be measured over time? That's the missing piece. And you can take that scenario and apply it in a number of different places and spaces and come up with the same output. But the action plan for me was the silver bullet. The action plan for me hasn't moved in 12, 13 years. So it's unfortunate that I can give you the action plan today, or any one of your students or any other ambassador at the LSA, and ask you the question, where do you think we are on every single one of these bullet points? And we'll have a conversation that makes the action plan relevant today, but it was also relevant in 2009. And my concern is I'm constantly getting drawn into conversations that take me backwards, not forwards. And that is why I love the concept of the digital twin, because it's a digitally enabled, data-driven solution for business that will touch the lives of every person in society if used well. And within that context, you are able to pick up one of the recommendations in the action plan, which was to create more diverse supply chains. Right? You've got a lot of talent on this call who may want to set up in business as an independent. The question is, will they win work as an independent, or will they have to join a big firm to sell their wares, right? You can slice and dice this conversation in so many different ways, but that piece of work in 2009, 10, 11 was great, but it didn't even scratch the surface in terms of outputs. And that's the challenge that I'm still pushing today.
That's a fantastic response, and I think it kind of starts to address our final question. But I think that point of, and I think it's so relevant to student projects particularly, because as you know, I'm very sure you're very familiar with, when students are building a brief and then a thesis and a brief and feeling like they've got to originate everything. And as a tutor, you're constantly saying, no, there's stuff that is so much stuff that you just take that and you address it now.
Absolutely.
Everything around that, the context, the learning, all has moved on. So the value of taking that information and moving it forward is just brilliant. And I hope everybody can hear that. I will go to the final question in our last 3 minutes, which is, you have almost given it, but what would your advice be to architecture students trying to make meaningful change in the built environment?
Wow.
Just a tiny question.
Well, number one, don't argue with the QS. I'll just throw that one out there. But no, in all seriousness, I would say that don't get siloed into thinking like an architect. Understand that I will always be a custodian of the process of creating a built environment. And you have to have a respect for your contribution in addition to the respect for others. And I think that's probably the best message I can give, because we have a real problem with siloed ways of working, right? It wasn't my fault, it was the engineer. It wasn't my fault, it was the architect. We got to stop that. And the digital twin solution de-risks that outcome by ensuring that everybody works in an agile, digitally enabled, data-driven, common data environment. So everybody can see the risk and the effort and the contribution, and everybody is forced to collaborate. And that collaboration piece, we talk a good game, but we just don't do it well. We never have. And I'm pretty sure that it needs to change. It needs to change.
Yeah. It takes some learning. It's a hard thing to learn to do when you're not used to
Definitely.
doing it, right?
Well, when you're carrying PI, of course, the first thing you're thinking, does this hurt or damage or my PI, right? And I'm almost thinking that actually the insurance sector should start thinking about project-wide PI, collective skin in the game, right? It's gonna come. It's going to come as an evolution of how we build and procure. Collective risk will have to be carried by the client. And that change of mindset, that change of the way we do things, it's coming. It's not a million miles away. The digital twin is going to unlock so many new innovations. Yeah, so I'm excited. I've never been more excited in my career, to be fair, and I'm 53 years young. So
great. Well, that's a fantastic place to end, Bola. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it. And I can sense there are good at least 2 or 3 more talks, but I hope you will come and do those in the studio at some point. Come and meet our
God
students.
willing.
And
God willing, absolutely.
let me thank everybody for coming. I will let everybody get back to work. I know you've got about 2 minutes to go and stretch your legs. But thanks so much, Bola, for joining us. And I look
My
forward
pleasure.
to everybody again next week, when we will talk about how to tackle overheating homes. Another rich subject. All right. Thanks so much again. Goodbye,
My
everybody.
pleasure. Thank you so much, Samantha. Take care, everyone. Bye now.
Bye-bye.